Hi, I'm Dave Seastrom, longtime Brown County guy. Actually going on 41 years of living here, and during this time I've seen an enormous amount of logging. What we're seeing now, though, is entirely different from how it's been conducted since the very first timber sales in the early 60s. When I realized that not only was the method of logging completely changed, but that the scope of it, the dramatic increase that was taking place, was happening all around me, I decided to get active, and I joined a couple of different groups. And one of them is the Indiana Forest Alliance, and the other is a brand new group that we just formed, which is focused entirely on Brown County, the Tecumseh Trail, and the Lake Lemon Watershed, which is the Wild Tecumseh Friends, or as we like to call it, the WTF. This group, which is now only 3 months old, we have a Facebook page. We have regular monthly meetings that are available for anyone to attend. What's happened recently is that the state of Indiana has decided to sell 3 tracts out of the formerly protected backcountry area right off at the end of Possum Trot. This has spurred an enormous amount of action. The governor has received multiple contacts, letters, telephone calls, emails. We've started a postcard writing campaign, which so far we've collected almost 500 postcards. We will be at farmer markets and other events. You'll recognize us. We're the Smiling Forest activists that are standing in front of a table that have a stack of cards to sign. But some of the issues and what you'll see in the photographs are that the DNR has what they call best management practices. And these dictate certain things take place during and after a timber sale. And one of them is the remediation of erosion. And they do this in a couple of different ways. Unfortunately, they don't have to complete any of these things until after the logging takes place. So the water bars and the diversion and all of this stuff can go undone for months and months. And what these photographs show quite clearly is the amount of erosion that takes place in the interim. Now, this is a critical issue for Lake Lemon because they have this enormous siltation process going on. The lake is projected to last for 120 years, and it's 60 years since the lake was built. But it is more than halfway silted in. So there are about a dozen DNR properties in the watershed, and each one of them will be logged in the manner that they are currently logging, which is, what can I say? It's a highly mechanized process now, right? Whereas up until 12 years ago, guys in pickup trucks with chainsaws would show up and they would cut the trees down, and a skidder would carefully pull them out along the hiking trails, respecting the forest floor. And now they use this giant machine called a feller buncher. Now this thing is a monster. I mean, the tires are enormous and they have these really deep treads. And in the front of this thing is an articulated arm that literally grabs the tree, and then a saw blade shoots out from underneath it, cuts the tree off, and shoves it over. It takes about as long as my description of it. And when that happens, right behind it comes a machine that's got an articulated arm that snatches it and starts pulling it out of the woods. When they're done with all of the logging, they go back and they bulldoze the forest floor clean and build 30-foot wide gravel roads on the former hiking trails, completely obliterating them. In their wake is bleeding topsoil and the spread of invasive species, most notably stilt grass. This is evident from any walk that you can take in a logged out area. So I've put together a little talk that I've been presenting to people, and especially the folks at the Lake Lemon Conservancy. And the point is, they're about to spend $4.5 million to buy this specialized dredging equipment to try to keep up with the siltation. Only they haven't calculated the rate of increase due to all the logging. The best possible way to prevent erosion is to preserve the forest intact. I mean, there's no question about it. No amount of remediation following a logging event prevents erosion, even if it's done at the time of the logging, which it's not. You know, this can take up to months and months after a logging event takes place. So what's actually happening is a dramatic increase in the rate of siltation. And there are days following a heavy rain event that Bean Blossom Creek looks like a chocolate milkshake. I mean, it has a viscosity. It's so thick with the silt. So we feel that we, being the WTF and the Indiana Forest Alliance, and hopefully the Lake Lemon Conservancy, which they haven't signed off on this yet, but our thought is that a moratorium on the logging of these areas that would also include the 3 backcountry proposed sale areas, because they drain directly into Lake Lemon as well, that is the proper way to go about this. You know, let's put a moratorium on this logging, you know, analyze the situation from both sides, you know, and come up with some kind of a plan that protects these areas. You know, most of the watershed of Lake Lemon is private land, and there's nothing that we can do. You know, we can ask people to behave, but other than that, there's no official sanction that requires you to behave. And so here we have public-owned lands and a real opportunity to prevent the upcoming disaster that's about to take place for Lake Lemon.
Dave, the problems that you mentioned vis-a-vis Lake Lemon, obviously that particular tract of land doesn't reach Lake Monroe, but they're doing logging in areas that are in the Lake Monroe watershed, right? So the same dynamic is actually impacting Lake Monroe. No,
that's exactly correct, Jeff. And in fact, 56% of the watershed of Lake Monroe is in Brown County. And I recently addressed a group called the Friends of Lake Monroe, and using exactly the same photographs that you will see, demonstrated that this problem is not unique to Lake Lemon. It's anywhere that a DNR property is in the watershed. And there is lots of DNR property in the watershed of Lake Monroe. So this issue is broader than just one lake. And, you know, Lake Monroe is the water source for 120,000 people. So it's imperative that these water sources be protected. And one of the huge issues they all face is siltation. And one thought that on those photographs that you'll see, those photographs were taken on or before July 1st. This is before Indiana had a record-breaking 4-inch in one-day rain event. I intend to go back and get more photographs, but I assure you that you know, the siltation after that rain was incredible. Even in a properly done logging operation, the soil is so roughed up, the bulldozing of the forest floor, the churning of the Feller Buncher tires, I mean, they might as well plow it all. And we have really steep terrain. This is what Brown County is. So, you know, if you want to protect that terrain, protect the forest. It's really that simple.
Well, then we have this uproar about climate change and about the decimation of rainforests down in South America. And yet here in Indiana, we have, you know, this little oasis of forest that is being similarly decimated. You know, that the irony of that to me is astounding. That, you know, on one hand, you know, we get admonished about our carbon footprint, and on the other hand, we have these massive carbon sinks of in the forests that are just being obliterated.
Well, that's exactly the correct parallel. So the same thing that's happening in Brazil is happening in Indiana for exactly the same reason: money. That's what it's about. So what we have now is a forest that's completely intact, and it's sequestering an enormous amount of carbon every single day and pumping out oxygen. Well, once you cut that forest down, and especially the way they're doing it now, where they pile the coal logs and let them rot, those forests then become emitters of carbon into the atmosphere. They're no longer absorbing the carbon. And there is no way that young saplings absorb the same amount of carbon as mature trees. In the natural forest, a tree, there are winners and losers. And the older trees succumb to whatever and fall to the ground. They create a natural disturbance, and in that opening, young trees grow up very quickly. So almost as soon as one tree is lost, a whole group of trees replace it. Out of that group of trees, one or two eventually become the giants that surround us. And those trees are the ones that are absorbing all of the carbon. It's tragic that we would trade our heritage for a short-term capital gain when all you have to do is charge $1 to go hiking like they do out west, and you have a source of income in perpetuity. And so far, the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, has been unresponsive to any of these suggestions. But the groundswell of interest and the number of people who are participating is growing constantly because we're surrounded by this logging. We see it. Now it's not an idea in the abstract. It's something you drive past every day.
Dave, I'm sure there are people out there who would like to get involved in this and maybe help out with moderating this logging program. Where would you send them online?
Well, I would go to a couple of different places. First, IndianaForestAlliance.org. We have an excellent website full of information. Follow the links. You can donate. You can find out how to volunteer. You can see the activities that we're up to, including the Eco Blitz, which is the complete inventory of all living things in a section of state forest in the backcountry area that's now being threatened by logging. The other two groups that I would recommend is Mind the Gap, which has a Facebook page, and the WTF, or the Wild Friends, the Wild Tecumseh Friends. And we also have a Facebook page. The IFA has its website and a Facebook page. So if you're hooked in at all, this is how you can get a hold of us. We are open to everyone. We encourage you to get a hold of us and find out what you can do.
Dave, this is great information, and we appreciate you taking time out of your day to come up and present it for the Lost Cabin Lodge audience. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeff.